design studio faculty who are working in the field, smaller offices, bigger offices, and so on and so on. So to say someone belongs to the academy as opposed to somebody
That's a construct you
belongs
don't
to
quite
the
accept.
street, I mean, everybody knows where that comes from, and there may be different perspectives from the academy and from the street, but the idea that the two would be antithetical to one another is not the idea. And where those meet, we can discuss a little bit. As far as in over the years when I've taught, I always give projects that we're working on in the office. I mean, it helps me in a completely selfish way because it gives you different perspective. It does. And the school overall does that and does it, I think, pretty consistently. I did a studio I split with Tom in the spring, and we gave a competition that we just won in the center of Albuquerque, of all places, New Mexico, and he gave the Welfare Island piece. Mm-hmm. So there are two competitions and a group of students doing both architects that are teaching, both architects that are working on projects that are actually projects germinating in offices. So I think there's everyone is not doing that, and it happens in different ways at different levels, but there's certainly an interest in that.
Mm-hmm. What about digital technology? Can you talk about what that's meant at the school and what you imagine that does for students who develop skills and knowledge base there beyond the school? Can you talk about that?
I think it's, from my point of view, there are some enormously talented artisans of digital practice. I don't, at SCI-Arc, teaching and working, but I don't think that's sufficient, and the point is made that that's not sufficient. I mean, looking at that work over the years, there comes to be a language in the same way Hitchcock and Johnson appendix, international style, is a language. And that language had tools, and it had an argument or an ideology. And the digital, Schumacher, Zaha's partner, Patrick Schumacher, wrote a book called Autopoiesis. Do you know? You guys know that book? And we've had a number of fairly raucous debates, one in L.A., one in London, and to give him talking about what he's advocating now as a contemporary style. And if you want to be a contemporary architect, you need to work in a certain style. I mean, without going into all of the details of the differences, I think my sense is he's confused a tool with an image, so that dexterity with a tool, and this has often been the case in the history of architecture, rolls out a fairly predictable result. In the same way,
his parametric style.
That's right. Yeah. So if you're Eric Mendelsohn sitting in a trench in Verdun making those funny little sketches, and then you went back to an office with a triangle and a parallel rule, what's interesting to me about Mendelsohn is that what he was drawing couldn't be drawn in a technical sense or fabricated, at least in a conventional way. And you can see when he tried to do that Einstein Tower in Potsdam or whatever, they didn't know how to make the thing. And I think one of the areas of discussion at SCI-Arc, and I think part of a more innovative perspective, is that conceptual innovation in architecture should correlate with a capacity to invent how it's implemented. And if you're simply following along the digital tools or rules, then I think you'll produce now what is a very predictable language, as modern architecture also produced a kind of predictable language. I mean, for instance, with the robots, we've used the robots, here's a robot, a sequence of robots. put in the crankshaft, put in the tires, put in the wheels, put on the top, drive it away. In other words, robot 1 does this, robot 2 is on and so on and so on. We had the robot sketching, so the product, a project by a thesis student was actually my student to see whether the program given to a particular robot could be altered in the midst of producing the program, as opposed to, you do the wheels and you do the seats and you have your assignment inside, which is really the argument, the conventional technological argument for robotics. You take people out of the equation, you run it 24/7, you do this, you do this, you do this. So we're trying to see if there was a way to understand robots in terms of very different expectations. And I think this is probably true also in terms of the digital language. I think I'm interested in seeing whether it's possible to personalize it, and it is, so that the language belongs to the tool or to the machine, but it also belongs to the architect, in a sense, one architect at a time. And to what extent we're successful at that, I mean, it varies. But I think it would be a mistake to look at SCI-Arc as digital allegiance, which is being inculcated or taught or promulgated. I don't think it works that way.
Well, you're differentiating the platform at SCI-Arc from, for example, how you characterize Patrick Schumacher's sort of the style of the moment, the total style.
Right. I mean, this is not to entirely disparage Patrick. They're
Right.
doing a lot of work and a lot of unusual work. And I think his argument, and it's an interesting argument, is that what I'm talking about can't be done now. In other words, the idea of continuing to read, it's not the time to do that. And that every innovative time, his theory, every innovative time is followed by an implementation time. Mm-hmm. Okay?
We're ready
Boys
now.
and girls.
Yeah.
And now it's implementation time.
Right.
And so whatever is involved, and a hell of a lot is involved in using the technology to fabricate, there's a level of innovation in that, but we're not looking for a sort of surprise quotient or a different perspective. I mean, you don't see what they're doing. It's fantastic because it builds very big and very complex pieces. But the content of it itself, I think, is not what it was when Zaha started maybe 20, 25 years ago. So he's making an argument and I'm making a different argument.
Is it too much to say that you might characterize some aspects of practice as more about implementation and hopefully
I think it has to be.
Because of the requirements?
I think it has to be if you assume the objective of architecture is to build buildings.
Right.
And I think it is, and I think that's going back to the educational discussion, that's what SCI-Arc needs to do and to inculcate. In other words, you're an architect when you build buildings, notwithstanding Lebius and so on and so on, who has a
Right.
different kind of respect and it's a unique voice and needs to be acknowledged in that way. But the game is both to invent the content and invent the means to implement the content, both.
In your comments, you've sort of deconstructed some lines that are occasionally drawn between things. So you might deconstruct this one too. But there is over time a conversation about architecture and art, and where those domains are the same or are different, or where they're different. And you've been involved yourself in practice in some of these conversations. Can you talk about, is there a meaningful way in your mind, or are you interested at all in speaking about architecture either as the same as art or as separate from art in meaningful ways?
Geez, I don't know.
And I'm speaking, Eric, I'm speaking of maybe make it a little more focused. Speaking about in the public realm, I'm thinking about civic activity and the making of buildings and how public embraces art or architecture, how they perceive it.
I don't know, maybe it's a question of professional vanity. Personally, I was always absolutely satisfied to be an architect. And I think in general, although the words cross each other in different ways from different voices from time to time, that when you make it in a certain way, it takes on a quality which is a lyrical quality or a poetic quality. And somebody wants to say, okay, I recognize Brancusi or something, so that must be art, or sculpture or something. I don't see why that lyrical aspect is precluded in the discourse of architecture. I mean, I think it gets complicated when people are debating what exactly it is or where it originates. You know, if it originates in the program or the site or any number of aspects of architecture. So there are people who want to lay architecture content off on a whole series of pragmatic questions. I have solved those questions in some sort of lyrical way. And I think there are other people who look at lyricism in architecture as something which comes from somewhere else. And then somebody starts to say it's vanity or it's ego or it's idiosyncrasy or it's whatever it is. And I don't know that we need to solve that discussion. I think my real answer to the question is that architecture, qua architecture, is sufficient, more than that. And I don't